There's a door built into the side of a mountain near the North Pole, and behind it sits humanity's backup plan. If everything ever goes wrong, a war, a famine, some crop disease that quietly wipes out our food, this is the room we're supposed to start over from. Inside it are close to 1 billion seeds, sealed in the ice, just waiting. People started calling it the Doomsday Vault, and it was designed to sit up here, frozen and untouched for 1,000 years. It didn't quite make it 10 before water started getting in. The one place we built to outlast the apocalypse sprang a leak. And honestly, the reason it leaked is the part that should worry you more than the leak itself. So let's fly out to it, because there's a lot they got right here, and one thing they got badly wrong. This is Svalbard, a Norwegian archipelago so far north that it's actually closer to the North Pole than it is to Oslo. For most of the year, it's dark and frozen and home to more polar bears than people, which is exactly the reason they chose it. When you're building a vault meant to protect the world's food for 1,000 years, you're basically working off a checklist. It has to be remote, so nobody bothers it, politically stable, so nobody fights over it, high above sea level, so it can't possibly flood, and above all, it has to be cold. Not just cold now, but reliably, permanently frozen. Svalbard was that rare place that ticked all 4 boxes at once. And here's the clever bit. They dug the vault more than 100 meters straight into the mountain, so the seeds sit deep inside natural permafrost. The whole point of that is that even if the power died, even if humanity forgot this place existed entirely, the frozen ground on its own would keep those seeds cold for centuries. No electricity, no maintenance, nothing. The mountain does the work for free. That was the entire idea. Don't rely on machines that break. Rely on ice that's been frozen solid since the last ice age. And that's exactly the assumption that ended up cracking.
Before we get to the leak, it's worth understanding what's actually stored in there, because it's not quite what most people picture. Svalbard doesn't grow anything itself. It's more like a backup drive for the whole planet. All over the world, there are seed banks holding local crops, thousands of varieties of rice and wheat and beans and potatoes, including ancient ones you've never heard of that might just carry the one gene able to survive the next disease. The trouble is that those banks are fragile things. They burn down, they lose their funding. Some of them sit right in the middle of war zones. So each one ships a duplicate box of its seeds up here for safekeeping, completely free, and keeps ownership of it, like a safe deposit box that only they can ever open. More than 1,000 institutions from almost every country on Earth do this, which means nations that won't even sit at the same table still quietly store their seeds in the same freezer. And the vault has already been used for real. When the war in Syria cut off a major seed bank near Aleppo, they withdrew their backup from Svalbard, regrew it somewhere safer, and later deposited fresh copies. It did its job years before anyone thought it would have to. So, the flood. In late 2016, Svalbard had its warmest year on record, with temperatures running well above anything the builders had ever planned for, and the permafrost right at the mouth of the tunnel began to thaw. In an Arctic where that ground simply wasn't supposed to melt, meltwater ran straight into the entrance and then froze solid inside it, turning the front of the tunnel into something closer to an ice rink than a doorway. The headlines went nuclear almost overnight. The Doomsday Vault is flooding. And I want to be straight with you here, because the truth cuts both ways. The reassuring part is that the seeds were never actually in danger. The water only ever reached the entrance tunnel, while the seed chambers sit deeper and higher, behind several more doors, and they stayed completely dry. Not a single seed got wet. But here's the part people tend to skip past. The vault was designed around one promise, that this ground never thaws, and that promise is the whole reason they didn't bother waterproofing it in the first place. Permafrost isn't supposed to produce running water. So the leak wasn't really a construction mistake. It was the frozen ground itself breaking the one rule the entire design had been built on. The machinery didn't fail. The assumption underneath it did.
So Norway ended up spending millions repairing a vault that was never supposed to need repairs. They tore out the old entrance and built a new one from waterproof concrete, cut drainage ditches into the slope to steer meltwater away, and, this is the detail I love, they pulled a heat-generating transformer out of the tunnel because it turned out they'd been gently warming the permafrost from the inside without ever realizing it. They basically rebuilt the front of a structure meant to stand for 1,000 years, barely a decade after finishing it. And it worked. The vault is dry and secure and still taking deposits today. But it's worth sitting with what actually happened, because they didn't add waterproofing because a pipe burst. They added it because the climate had warmed enough to melt ground that had been frozen solid since the last ice age, in the single spot on the planet they'd specifically chosen because that was supposed to be impossible. And that's the real story here. Svalbard is warming faster than almost anywhere on Earth, several times quicker than the global average, so the permafrost they'd bet 1,000 years on is now thawing on a timescale of decades. They went looking for the most reliably frozen place they could find, and it's defrosting ahead of schedule. Which raises an obvious question. If the ground itself can't be trusted anymore, is the vault still the fortress it was sold as? The honest answer is that it's now a hybrid. The original dream was a vault that needed nothing from us, pure permafrost, no machines, no people. That's over. Today, Svalbard runs on active refrigeration units that keep the chambers at around -18 degrees, well below whatever the permafrost happens to be doing that year. In other words, they stopped fully trusting the mountain and plugged in a backup because the natural cold they built the whole thing around is no longer a guarantee they're willing to bet 1 billion seeds on. And they've started treating the seeds themselves as something to spread out rather than pile in one place. Svalbard was always meant to be the last line, but the flood was a reminder that even the last line has a location, and a location can fail. So the thinking now leans harder on the original logic. Lots of copies in lots of places, so that no single disaster, not even one at the backup itself, can take everything down at once.